Alrighty, welcome to a new episode of Time Egg LP Discusses. That's the show, right? What's the
That is
name of
this
this?
show,
Okay.
something like that.
And, fuck whatever episode this is. Who gives a shit? I have questions. You have questions. Let's get right the fuck into it.
Cool. I was very enthusiastic.
Okay. So, who's going first today? It's
Let's
usually
have you go. Let's have you go first, because I think yours are questions and mine's less of a question and more of a weird topic that I don't know how long it's going to be.
okay. Well, that's fair because the more I thought about it, the more I realized my first question is really multifaceted or
Okay.
complicated. And
Okay.
so my first question is what is a next gen, with the announcement of the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox, who gives a shit?
hmm
Uh, the next gen is coming up.
Yeah.
So what to you would be like a next gen Jerpagon? And
Like, how so? Like, mechanically, what would change?
like just in general, like what would make you look at it and go, "Yep, that couldn't have been done on the PS4."
Hmm.
Like what
Okay.
gives you that next gen feeling, whether it's the visuals or mechanics or whatever. And the reason I think that, and while I was thinking about this question, the reason it became so difficult was realistically there haven't been hardly any PS4 gen level
That's kind of what I was just
Jerpagas.
thinking.
I can only think of two,
Yeah.
and even then, one of them I'm kind of winging it.
Okay.
Final Fantasy 15 and Dragon Quest 11.
Okay.
Otherwise, everything else is just kind of PS3 era. I mean, even Persona 5 was a PS3 game.
Yeah. Another one. I mean, I don't really feel like there's been a major shift for a while. Like the PS1 era or even before then, we had like the sprites and it was all basically grid based. And then it opened up to like a 3D world kind of deal in the late PS2, early PS3 kind of era. I don't feel like it's really changed much since then.
I definitely think it has.
I mean,
You've seen less of fixed cameras and things
okay,
like that in favor of more behind the back cameras and more expansive fields to replace overworlds. I mean, even overworlds have pretty much completely dropped.
Overworlds have gone,
Yeah,
but
dropped.
we kind of lost those. I feel like when we moved to the PS2 and 3 era, like that was a while back.
It was the three though. The two still had a ton of overworlds.
Yeah,
It was really the leap to the three where you started to lose those.
okay.
And that's where, I mean, I feel like for me, this question comes down to two major points.
Okay.
Um, First of all, proprietary engines, I think they're called,
Okay.
or whatever. You're not going to see as many people making their own engines as you are using Unreal
Everyone
Engine,
using. Okay. Yeah.
which you can already see. SMT5 is on Unreal Engine. Octopath Traveler is on Unreal Engine.
Is it really? I didn't know
Yeah, like you're going to see a lot more of these games using
that.
Unreal Engine, which will help save a lot of time
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of money and efficiency and budget that can then
Yeah.
hopefully be rolled into other things.
Hopefully.
And I think user
You hope that.
interface. What?
Oh, I was just saying, what you think that money is gonna help develop a bigger game or a better game or something instead of having.
Well, I think like when I think about something like Tails, right?
Okay.
When you think of Exilia, which was their first time that they jumped to the new camera angle,
Yeah.
and that really does change a lot in terms of what you have to design because you have to design everything with the idea that the player can look all the way around it.
Hmm.
So like in a lot of games and a lot of maps and whatnot with fixed cameras, like the model might not even be fully modeled. Like the
No,
back
it's
half
just
could
what
just
you
not
see.
exist.
Yeah.
Because why bother rendering that if the player's never going to see it? It just eats up frame rate and resources and stuff like that.
So with the 3D camera, you think they just put more work into making everything?
Well, you kind of have to because also, like I'm thinking of, do you remember in Vesperia, the city of Hamil, I think, or Hamil or whatever, the one with the giant tree?
Vaguely.
So my point is that realistically, the camera is fixed in such a way so that you're always facing that tree, right?
Yeah.
Like it kind of moves around, like on a relative to the tree, like it pans up and around.
Okay.
But if you think about that from a player controlled camera, all of a sudden there's this whole other half of the map, like the entire eastern half of
That
the
you just
city that has to be rendered.
okay.
Like it really is a lot more work to design environments like that.
Yeah.
And that takes time and that takes money. And when you were already talking about things that aren't huge budget as it is. But
Okay.
I think that when you're doing something like with Unreal and you can do stuff like pre-bake your lighting engine so you don't have to design your own lighting engine, and it's easier because when a lot of people are using the same engines, there's a lot of resources for that engine.
Yeah.
So when you encounter problems, you're not just stuck trying to troubleshoot your own shit.
Okay.
So by saving time and money in that, hopefully what it translates to, and okay, I brought up Exilia because like Charlton in Exilia. Do you remember that city at all?
Not by the name.
It was the trading city with the like kind of windmill thing in the center where you got Rowan.
Okay. Not really, but okay.
The point is, it's supposed to be this like decent sized trading city,
Yeah.
but the map is just like a T of like the actual explorable, walkable area.
Okay.
And if you compare that to some of the cities in Berseria, they have gotten substantially larger in
Yeah.
terms of what
Okay.
you can run around and move in, and so have the fields.
Yeah.
And I think you'll see kind of a continuation of that in terms of things
Size,
getting.
like size, basically.
Yeah, because really, I don't think we're still quite to the scale of what you could pull off with some of the fixed camera stuff.
Okay.
But I think we can definitely get there, or we're working towards that. I mean, like Dragon Quest XI, I know has really big explorable cities,
Hmm.
and that's great, and that's kind of what I mean by like I want to see more of that, just in stuff that doesn't have Dragon Quest money behind it.
Okay. So just kind of bigger.
Well, more fully realized locales,
Okay.
not so much bigger in the sense that like just oh it's bigger, but bigger in the sense that it's not
There's
just a bunch of like look at that really cool city that's off in the distance that you can't go anywhere to because the actual city is limited to a T, like the explorable area of the city. Just now you can actually go through and explore the city
okay.
rather than just two or three streets of the city.
Okay.
So I'd say it's more realized because all the city and stuff was there. You just couldn't go there. It was just a backdrop to
Yeah.
make it
And
feel bigger.
you're thinking or hoping that it's gonna be all fully rendered now, so you can actually go into all those everywhere.
I don't expect you to be able to go everywhere, just more
More.
realized. And
Okay.
kind of going hand in hand with that, something that started in Exilia that I have since seen in both Tokyo Mirage Sessions and Persona 5 does it, that I'm actually totally cool with, are more NPCs in town, but you can't talk to all of them.
Yeah, I've noticed that, and I've kind of come to like that too.
Like it just makes towns feel bigger and more realized.
Hmm.
And that's where like I don't have to go into everybody's house because I don't want this to be like Skyrim,
Yeah.
where it's like, oh, the city is only like 6 buildings. What
Okay.
whatever. I don't have to go into every building. It's just I'd like to be able to explore more than 2 very limited streets.
Okay.
And I think there's been more of a motion towards that.
I could see that. Okay.
And my second thing that I think is going to be big going forward, and I say this because I've already seen it,
Yeah.
is user interface.
Yeah,
Um,
I could
because
actually see that one too.
like let's not fuck around. There's been really 3 big releases that are going to define the past generation in terms of JRPGs. Final
Okay.
Fantasy, just period, probably 7R, but
Yeah.
that them because they always do.
Yeah.
Dragon Quest because they always do.
Yeah.
But the bang out success of Persona 5 has turned a lot of heads in the
Yeah.
industry. And a lot of that has been focused on its user interface and design to the extent where you already saw Trails of Cold Steel 3 mimicking that layout
Yeah.
where it's tied to individual buttons instead of a menu,
Hmm.
which Persona 5 didn't originate that.
No, but
Lest,
it's the one that.
lest anyone fucking think that. Yes, I have played Super Mario RPG on the fucking Super Nintendo where they did that. I know it's not the one that originated it, but for one reason or another, it's the game that brought that.
Caught on.
It brought it into focus and into attention.
Yeah.
That like maybe there's a better way of doing it than just menus, and people react really well when we minimize
Hmm.
menus.
Yeah. Because hell, even the Fairy Tail RPG's been doing basically that same idea where everything's all through single button presses.
And
So yeah.
I just think that's like I mean you can already see it and stuff now, and I think going forward it's just going to be another point.
I mean, without changing the whole core concept of how a game plays, they need to focus on those like smaller things now. So I could see menus, interface, things like that starting to finally get tweaked because they can't really make too much of a change to the gameplay without feeling like something completely different.
Well, I think more so than that, they don't have the budget to do like a Final Fantasy where you're so overwhelmed with the visuals and the presentation and whatever.
Yeah, a lot of the smaller companies won't.
Like that's what makes this such a complicated discussion is that JRPGs have never been the or not have never been. This isn't the PS1 era where they were the big budget titles.
No, yeah,
So in terms of what's next gen, eh, there's not going to be a whole. It's going to be more in those areas to try and make them more accessible.
okay. Make them more accessible, like broader appeal, or make them more accessible, like just easier access menus and in-game stuff.
Like menus and stuff like that. Like again, Persona 5, that very responsive, snappy menu and
Mm,
interface, where nothing about the gameplay is pure Jerpaga,
yeah,
but a lot of people really like that snappy responsiveness, and
of the menus.
it's a lot more streamlined. You don't spend as much time in a menu,
Okay.
and I think that's just breaking down some of the things that people don't like about Jerpaga. Like the shift away from random encounters,
Hmm.
um, reducing the need to grind in games,
Yeah.
just those kinds of streamlining the experience without necessarily simplifying it.
Okay. Yeah. I could see something like that.
But the thing is, then there's this other side of the question that I didn't even think of,
What's
because
that?
a lot of people think of next gen, they think of the PS5 and the Xbox Series X.
Hmm.
But one of the things that has been happening that we're in the transition of is the death of the traditional handheld console with the
Yeah.
Switch. And that there are a lot of great JRPGs that got made on handhelds because they could
Yeah.
be made on handhelds on smaller budgets.
Hmm.
That's where you got like your Radiant Historia and Golden Sun and just Etrian Odysseys, games like that.
Cheap things because they were specifically for handhelds and they weren't competing with all the big name everything.
Yeah, you could make a solid handheld game without needing a AAA budget.
Yeah.
And now that that's gone, they really only have two options, and that's to shift to mobile, like
Yeah.
phones, or I I don't know if the Switch is going to end up being home to a lot of smaller games like that, or I guess the third option is what you're seeing like with I think it's Eiyuden Dynasty,
Okay.
which I don't expect you to know.
No.
Eiyuden Chronicle,
Okay.
which is the makers of Suikoden,
Okay.
the original core crew, started a Kickstarter to make a game in that style.
Okay.
But even though 3, 4, and 5 were all 3D games, like fully realized whatever PlayStation 2 games,
Yeah.
they're making it in the style of 1 and 2.
Okay.
It's not sprites, but it's still more that 2D style.
Okay.
And I see that being a thing that could happen too, is more like Kickstarter projects that intentionally evoke a retro feel because the cost of doing 3D stuff is so much
Is high.
higher.
Yeah, I mean, even without the handhelds, I still feel like there's still a ton of those small, not very well known RPGs. They're just hidden on the PSN or the Switch store, and
I don't even
they don't get physical releases.
I don't even know that there are that many,
There are actually. I was surprised, and
because
there
I'm
are
not talking about indie games.
no, neither am I. Not a lot, anyways. But
I'm
no,
talking I'm talking about
I'm
like
not
games
talking
from
about. Yeah,
full-fledged companies, just smaller releases.
yeah. So am I. There are actually quite a few.
Like, can you throw out some examples?
Not off the top of my head. If I pulled up my Switch, I could probably bring a few, but
Because the problem is a lot of them are ports. Like even Tokyo Xanadu is a port of a Vita game.
yeah, no, I know. But that's where I think a lot of them are going. Instead of going to handheld, they're going to digital only, and they're getting buried or missed because they're digital only.
I don't know. I'd need to hear some examples because I haven't noticed this.
I mean, I know that's where at least a lot of them are. The ones that would have been out on handhelds, at least I feel like would have been out on handhelds, are going straight digital store. Those kind of B level RPGs.
Well, it's not really about being B level. I mean,
It's not a.
there are
It's
handheld
not.
games that are as good as.
All right, B budget. I'm not saying quality. I'm just saying budget style. Yeah, they've got those are all digital. I'm just not getting physical releases.
I don't know because I follow RPG releases and I haven't seen anything like that. So
At least I see a bunch there, and that's
I
you
see a
know.
bunch, but they're all like just indie stuff.
I mean, there are those, but there are bigger ones too, and that like I said, B kind of level. Those, they're still not full $60 releases by big companies with big names, but they're big enough. They're not a tiny little indie development. They're not a $10 little hour-long RPG. They're still full length,
Indie
Like I said,
just means independent
yeah,
developer. I
no,
mean, it can be a 40-hour game and still be indie.
yeah, I'm not, whatever. All I'm saying is that the handheld market, I think, is going straight to all digital market.
I don't know because I haven't seen the continuation of certain handheld franchises yet, so we'll see. I'm really curious what Etrian Odyssey is going to do going forward.
But that's what I see happening. Because, yeah, without handhelds, all those mid-tier RPGs need a place to go, and I think digital is where they're going to go.
I would assume they'd go more mobile, but
I hope not.
well,
I feel like with mobile, that's a whole separate genre almost.
it kind
With
of
all,
is, but in Japan, that's where a lot of the money is.
yeah, yeah, maybe, but I hope not.
And I agree.
But
So anyway, that's enough for that question.
I never even answered that question.
Go ahead. You didn't seem like you had anything to add to it.
No, because I just had a different answer.
Okay,
I
go ahead. What's
I
your
was gonna say
answer?
I see things going faster. Where originally they were all strictly turn-based, and then we kind of moved to the ATB system, and then we moved to this like slower but real-time kind of charge up stamina system that the Tails had to 15 and 7R where they're full real-time. I could see things moving to a faster, more real-time build because we have the processing power to maintain it now.
So you think turn-based is gonna?
Yeah, I think turn-based is going to lose some of its popularity in exchange for a faster, more real-time base.
It's kind of difficult to gauge that because when you think about it, there aren't a lot of franchises that are still going these days that have been going for a long period of time.
Hmm.
So like you mentioned Tails, but Tails has always been
Yeah,
real
but
time.
yeah, but compare the older ones where you have less options and it a little bit slower compared to the newer ones where it's a full 3D map.
It's been a full 3D map since Symphonia,
Okay.
Scratching Rebirth,
Yeah.
which was like the fifth game in the series. So
But
I mean, I don't even think the new ones are any faster than the old ones.
you don't think so?
They're really not that. No,
Like from what I'm just thinking from when I played Berseria and Graces even, Graces has a lot more downtime and recharge time.
but that has more to
That's
do with the battle system itself. I mean, Vesperia has very little downtime if you know how to like guard cancel.
yeah. I don't know. Again, when I played Berser or Vesperia, it felt slower. It felt like there were still not quite turns, but you had like a attack phase and then a kind of like a pause or a defense phase and then an attack phase.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying is if you know how to game the system though, like if you know how to cancel out of things, which it's not really gaming the system since it was intentionally added, you can eliminate that to a certain extent. But
See, and
like
I'm just
to me, Grace is fundamentally like yeah, CC takes longer to recharge, but if there's one thing that a lot of people complain about Grace is it's that CC recharging is slow.
mhm,
Even people who like it tend to agree that it's a little on the slow side.
it is.
And but in terms of like the actual movement and the responsiveness, I actually feel like it's way quicker than Berseria.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I don't know. I feel like even the faster ones of that are slower than a real time game. As far as like, I don't want to say an action game, but kind of like an action game.
well, Tails has been trying to move towards an action game
Yeah,
setup for a while because
and
originally they were based more on fighting games
mhm,
than they were action games, and then Graces was the first one that played more like an action game than a fighting game.
Yeah.
And then,
Yeah.
but I mean, Tails is its own little thing.
Yeah.
My point, to get back to my original point, because we're going on a tangent, was like aside from Final Fantasy, I can't think of another long running series that has jumped to real time.
Long running, no. But I feel like they're, like I said, those little B games and smaller things. I just get the impression that they're all going faster to a slightly more active, and you're seeing less strict turns.
And see, I feel the opposite.
Yeah.
I actually feel like turn based has been kind of making a resurgence.
With the big names, maybe.
Even then, because like the closest thing I think we have to this is Octopath Traveler, because
Okay.
it's made by more or less the same team that made Bravely Default,
Okay.
which is the same team that made Final Fantasy Heroes of the Four, whatever. Who gives a shit on the DS? The
Okay.
point being that they actually did make that jump from handheld to a console release,
Yeah.
and it's still traditional turn based, and it sold 1 million copies.
Yeah.
It didn't do great, but it did pretty damn well for what it was.
Yeah.
And I don't really see like trails changing to turn to more active combat.
Yeah.
I I
It's like
mean,
Trails and Dragon Quest and the ones that have been established for God knows how many years. Probably not. The ones that don't change, I don't see changing. But it's all those smaller ones, the not the big names that I see moving towards. Next gen in general, I see faster, whereas even if these few big titles might not. Like Persona 7 or 6 or whatever the fuck the next one is, 6.
6.
I still see that being turn based.
Well,
But I
yeah,
see there be but I still see there being a lot of real time things, smaller things around it with it.
but it's hard to tell. Again, I feel like we have different definitions for smaller things,
You might.
because I like when I mentioned Radiant Historia, that was released by Atlas,
Okay.
which who did Persona and stuff like that, and I don't see their new fantasy game being anything other than turn based. I mean, it might
Okay.
be, but part of the problem that I kind of wanted to bring up but forgot was that you don't really see a whole lot of those smaller projects anymore. Your Tokyo Xanadu's, your Tokyo Mirage Sessions, those just don't really exist a whole lot anymore.
Your small games by big companies.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like you're saying you see them moving more towards that direction, and I guess my problem isn't really necessarily that I disagree with you in that sense as so much as I don't even see them at all.
Well, I'm not. Maybe I'm thinking small games by smaller companies.
Like who?
I don't know. Fuck, maybe the indies, but something a little bigger than that.
Like the only thing I can really think of is like Tokyo RPG Studios,
Yeah.
who did I Am Setsuna, Lost
Hmm.
Sphere, and then whatever the fuck their latest game was.
Yeah.
And I feel like they're a weird outlier because for 2 of their 3 games they've just been trying to remake Chrono Trigger.
Yeah.
So it's like I don't even really want to judge them as the same thing. But otherwise,
But maybe it's companies that are that size and style.
I just don't know of any. Falcom is smaller, but I mean, as I complained about, they pretty much only do Trails and East right now.
Trail of Ease. Yeah.
Gust, who admittedly the latest Atelier Ryza, I think, used kind of an ATB combat system.
Okay.
Did it? Holy shit, I can't even remember how that game played. I think it was more active,
Okay.
but
Or I don't know. Maybe even not active, just
they
less rigid.
Gust keeps changing shit up
Yeah.
with all their like every new major trilogy they
Trust
switch.
people.
Yeah, it uses kind of an ATB-esque system where moves and you only control one character.
Okay.
And that, like, I agree with. I think that kind of goes with what I was saying with the user interface, where it's going to be that streamlining experience.
Yeah.
You know, like let's renovate the musty old turn-based system and make it fun and make it snappy and responsive and that type thing.
Okay.
But in terms of things going more real time, I don't know, because it's hard to look at anything outside of the big established franchises because nobody's fucking making much outside of the big established franchises.
And see, that's what I don't know. I feel like I disagree, and we just don't see them.
And this is where I'm saying, like, then just show them to me.
Yeah, and maybe I'm just thinking of indies that I don't know, but I don't know. I feel like they're there.
I mean, I'm happy to be proven wrong. I just don't see them. And like, I know I'm putting you on the spot. People can't remember things on the spot, but it's like, just show them to me then. Like, fuck, dude, I'm not being closed-minded about it. I just want to see them.
I'll have to try and find my Switch later and get some names or something.
So
But
anyway,
either way, that's what I see. Faster and less rigid turns.
okay. So, do we go on to the next question now? Are you ready?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, so the next question is, what is your perfect difficulty for a game? Like for our
Okay.
Jerpica. Either.
I have no idea how you will want that answered.
So I guess I'll go first then.
When I hear what's your perfect difficulty, I think hard enough that I have to think, but not so hard that I lose more than once or twice.
Well, that's part
There
of
you
it.
go.
Like I never want. I think there should always be a potential for, like, especially in boss fights, there
Yeah.
should always be a potential for game over, but not
Yeah.
due to randomness. So, like, part of my frustration, or part of what can be frustrating about a game like Persona 3 is it's hard, but there are going to be deaths where all that happened was your main character got critted and unfortunately game over, sucks to be you.
Yeah.
And that to me is not the kind of difficulty that I want.
Trying to remember. I saw a video from, I think it was Extra Credits actually, that had a difference on punishing and difficulty, and how random bullshit like that was not actual difficulty.
Well, because it can't be controlled.
Yeah.
You can't plan for that. And that's where
And the whole point of that was that difficult is fine because that's challenge to understand and overcome, whereas punishing, like you just got fucked and lost because of just some random crit or an insta kill that just happened to work, that at that point you're not talking about difficulty anymore.
yeah, you're just talking about RNG crap.
Yeah.
But again, it's very hard to find that balance between difficult and without forcing you down a singular path to completion. And that's what happens when things become overly hard. is that then your margin for error becomes so small that there's only one way to win,
Okay.
and I don't like that either.
Yeah.
So realistically, what I want from difficulty is something to test that tests your abilities but doesn't restrict you beyond to a single strategy. And I emphasize a single strategy because I think like SMT forcing you to buff and debuff is fine.
Okay.
Like yes, it forces you to do a certain thing, not so much later in the game because it gets way too easy later in the game. But early on, if you don't buff or debuff, you can get killed in one hit on harder difficulties.
Okay.
And I'm game with that. That's fun to me because it's forcing you to think outside the box and understand the systems. But it's not like you end up in this pattern where, like, if you want to do a solo run in Persona, it's just Heat Razor, debilitate, charge, attack, rinse, repeat. That's the whole strategy.
Yeah.
Because it's so challenging because the game wasn't designed that way. Then these are challenge runs, but I'm just using it as an example of where the difficulty becomes so high that there is one
Only one
strategy.
strategy that works. Okay.
And I don't like if if the game is too easy to where you never feel in danger of a game over. That's most games, honestly, for me, and I don't want to say that like God, wow,
Like exactly how it sounded.
I'm such a big dick. I know everything. But like
Mm.
the difference between Final Fantasy X and Final Fantasy 13 is when I played Final Fantasy X, I never game overed once.
Okay.
And there was one time when I came close, and it was felt like for a horse shit reason, but whatever. Point is, it never like pushed me in that way. But 13,
Okay.
I've game over a couple times already, and rather than like get annoyed by it, I come back to it like, okay, I'm being too aggressive. I need to back off and heal a bit more.
Okay.
Which isn't the only thing I could do. I could buff,
Yeah.
spend some time buffing or spend some time healing. Maybe I need to go double Ravager for a bit to build the chain quicker or whatever. Like, it's that sense that you can't just do whatever you want and get away with it because then you don't have to engage in the game's mechanics.
So hard enough that there's a threat, but not so hard that you can lose to pure randomness.
Well, the pure randomness thing is just like an asterisk. Like you just shouldn't have that happen anyway.
So then hard enough to
Hard
hard enough that there's a threat, but not so hard that there's only one strategy.
exactly.
Okay.
But I know some people, the second they hit a game over screen, they're done.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like the gist of this question. I think I like to be challenged like in games a lot more than you do
Yeah, I
because
agree with that.
like I really get frustrated with like game Persona being so easy because it's like they don't. I mean, it's not like they don't expect you to build this crazy powerful shit, and it's like okay, I get that on normal, but it'd be nice if on hard or I wish Merciless wasn't just a meme.
Yeah.
That there was actually a difficulty based around that upped
Okay.
the ante to the point where being stupidly overpowered, there is no such thing as stupidly overpowered.
Yeah.
You might have an easier time, but there's still that threat.
Then what's I don't know what the deal with merciless mode is, but then isn't that what that's supposed to be?
Well, no, in Merciless mode, it's the same difficulty,
Yeah.
but everything's the same except criticals and weaknesses do 3 times more damage.
Okay.
So actually, it can be easier if you're to the point in the game where you can just hit every enemy's weakness.
Okay.
The game's just a fucking joke, and the only time you'll ever game over is if your main character gets randomly critted, so it makes it just even more RNG.
Okay.
It's not actually harder, it's just more
So then
random.
you just want like a bigger numbers mode.
Yeah, kind of. I don't know if bigger numbers is the best way to do it, but
Okay. Well,
like give bosses new abilities that only show up in harder difficulties.
I know some games do that.
I know, and it's great.
Yeah.
Just shit like that, like just stuff. Because RPGs are one of the hardest things to balance because, as I've said in the past, they have an inverse difficulty curve.
Yeah.
They're harder at the start than they are at the end because by the end you have the freedom
You
to,
have everything you can do.
yeah. And I mean, some games are just hell at the start, but once you get past the first 3 hours, it's like, wow, this is fucking cakewalk.
Okay.
Even Dragon Quest 3 is like that for me, where I had to go out and grind a few levels early on, but once I got off Tutorial Island,
Yeah.
I got my shit slapped. Like 2 hits from anything could kill just about any party member.
Okay.
So I had to suck it up and grind. Maybe I'm revealing myself to be a casual at Dragon Quest because I couldn't beat the game in level 3. I don't fucking know. Doesn't seem like there was a whole lot of options other than to pray to Christ it worked. Um, and get enough money to get all the latest gear.
Okay.
But ever since that first session where I actually just had to stop and grind, I've been able to go pretty much nonstop.
Okay.
And it's like,
Without having to stop or anything again.
yeah, and it's like, okay, so the difficulty curve feels about right for most of the game, but why is it so high at the start? Why is there that spike right at the beginning?
Yeah. Did anything change after then? Like, did you get more people or something? Or
No, I mean in Dragon Quest 3, you make your party in the first town, and that's your party the rest of the game. You don't
oh,
actually
okay.
have characters.
Okay. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I've seen difficulty spikes. Usually not right at the beginning, but difficulty spikes are a thing, and you just
Yeah, but my point being, I basically just I want the difficulty ideally to be like consistent,
yeah.
which sounds strange, but I don't mind having moments where like towards the end of the dungeon, maybe I'm kicking everything's ass,
Yeah.
but really the most fun dungeons in like a Persona game are the first few where there are just those moments of like, oh shit, tense, like if I do one thing wrong here, man, I'm gonna get fucked up.
I mean, I
And
get
I
that,
mean, I,
but I disagree on that one. I get it, but I like the later ones where you have all the options, where it might be less difficult, but you can do everything and feel more powerful, I guess.
and that to me is where it's like I don't mind it in the sense that I don't mind feeling more powerful, but it feels like the challenge doesn't rise to your power in a relevant way. Like I don't want level scaling where everything is the same level you are. I hate that shit
Mhm.
with a passion.
Yeah.
Uh, but I feel like the more powers you gain, the enemy should gain something to compensate, so that it keeps things interesting. So that
Okay.
I can't just bust out Yoshitsune and just fucking ass blast everything that doesn't repel fucking physical.
Which I mean, I feel like they try to do that. Like as you get new elements, the enemies have access to that same new element, so now you have a bigger potential weakness to think about. I mean, they try to do that.
They just don't do it fast enough for my taste.
Maybe they just don't do it fast enough, or strict enough.
And they don't ramp it up enough for me
Okay.
because it just ends up too easy at the end.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, like, okay, I was fighting Yukiko in when I was doing Persona 4 Golden with my dad, and we're doing it on normal because who gives a
Okay.
fuck? We're just playing whatever.
Yeah.
And it was such a joke because we ended up having a high evasion thing for Chie and a fire ring, so she never got
Okay.
hit by fire.
Okay.
That it felt like underwhelming at the end because I've gone into that fight and just had it be like such a shit show
Yeah.
that it's like the fight itself feels less epic because it's too easy. I mean,
Okay.
you've got the final boss of Persona 5 who's the size of a fucking building,
Yeah.
and then you kill him in 4 turns.
Okay.
And it's like, this doesn't feel like a final boss. This doesn't give me the sense of like awe or overwhelming odds or overcoming those odds or any of the fun stuff that I get from the first dungeon boss.
Mm.
It's just it's so easy that it doesn't even do like the fight or the event or the scenario justice.
Okay.
I mean, it'd be like if the Magus fight in Chrono Trigger and he just like died in 3 hits. It's like, wait, this is it?
Yeah.
This is the Demon Lord? Oh,
I mean,
bummer.
I understand your point, but I don't know what that you expect other than just bigger numbers. Because I don't feel like I don't normal people have that problem.
Well, that's why I'm saying make harder
Just make
difficulties actually harder.
just make a fuck you mode.
It doesn't even need to be a fuck you mode, just a mode for people who fully understand the game's mechanics. Like normal's whatever, like it's fine, I guess. I don't know. It seems like it'd be a joke if hard is this easy, but like just make a mode for that actually fully makes people utilize your game mechanics that you made because you made some really interesting mechanics. Okay, to use another example, would 13 be as interesting a game if it didn't have that challenge that actually forced you to use the role switching?
Okay. I mean,
Or does the challenge actually
well,
force you to
like I
switch
said,
rules and understand the game better?
like I said, I get what your point is, but it really just sounds like it coming off as a I'm better than everything and nothing's hard because I'm so amazing.
I
And I get your point that you want more of a challenge because you understand the mechanics and that's all fine and good and dandy. But at what point do you just reach the I'm so good and this is shit because it's not hard enough and I'm so amazing?
well,
Because I
I
kind of feel
think
like
that's why
that's like,
difficulty options exist.
and at what point is it enough? Do you just need, do you need that fuck you mode? Because that's what it sounds like.
And that's what I'm
Like,
saying. But I mean, I'm talking about Personas specifically, but it applies to all games, and it's true in like Final Fantasy X as well, where it just wasn't super interesting because the fights were just hit the attack button and then win. You know, sometimes you had to use black magic, sometimes you switched in Waka, but most things still died in a single hit or two.
okay,
It just the difficulty wasn't there to make you really do anything in the combat other than cast haste. Which, to be fair, there wasn't much to the combat anyway because it's Final Fantasy.
yeah,
So my point is, if you aren't being challenged, if you're never even in a threat of a game over, you're never gonna bother learning how the game works or the intricacies of the game.
yeah. And again, I agree with that. That's all fine and good. There should be. enough of a challenge that losing is a possibility. It's like all your points you're making are fine. I think you're just taking it to a higher point that can be expected for the normal person.
But we're not talking
Because
about normal. This is what's your ideal difficulty.
yeah, no, and that's it sounds like your ideal difficulty is just a fuck you mode. That it's just leagues beyond what a normal person is just because fuck you, I guess.
Well, and the problem is, to me, a fuck you mode is like to scale levels of just pure, like, do you want to open up an Excel spreadsheet and plan this shit out?
And it sounds like that's what you
No.
want. You just want that for Persona.
And
It's like that's what I'm hearing at least.
but the
Is that
problem is that
oh my
Persona
god,
is so easy that like it's just too easy. You don't even need to open up an Excel sheet or whatever, even on hard. Like it's just not hard enough, even on hard, outside of whatever my personal, things are.
so you just want bigger numbers.
Or more interesting more interesting fights. Either or.
So what would make the fights more interesting? Different mechanics? Doesn't matter, you're still gonna beat the boss in 3 hits.
Well, like I said, the boss could have more moves. If the boss got 3 moves per turn, that could change things up dramatically instead of 2 moves per turn. If the boss had an ability that negated like charges or something,
I don't know, yeah. All your points of I want enough of a challenge, I guess, is fine. I don't know if you care more or what, but I don't know. But that's my thought. It just sounds like you kind of want that more difficulty for the sake of there should be more difficulty.
well, it's not for the sake of there should be more difficulty. It's for the sake of rewarding people for fully understanding and mastering your system.
Okay? I don't know.
It's appreciating the way
But all
things.
your points you've made, I pretty much agree with it.
Okay,
What?
we are getting a little. We're just talking in circles at this point.
It's like, yeah, hard enough that your mechanics matter, yes, without yeah, a threat of challenge, yes, not I don't know. Yeah,
Okay.
the threat of challenge, but I never feel like it was unfairly lost.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean that's the answer, but that's everyone's answer.
I
Threat of
I don't know though. Like I said, there are people I know who they if they see a game over screen, they're pissed,
yeah,
and it's like I don't mind seeing a game over screen. I just don't want it to be for a bullshit reason.
yeah.
In fact, if I don't see a game over screen at least once, I'm a little disappointed. Gonna be honest.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm not. As long as I had fun.
and that's the difference between us.
Yeah,
I mean, I have more fun when I am challenged.
yeah. Maybe the question needed to be reworded then, as to you want more of a challenge or more of a streamlined story with just
Well,
hard
but
enough to get by.
usually that's the option, and that's where it's what's ideal to you. What's your
So
preference? What's your ideal difficulty?
either difficult or just hard enough to get by or super easy.
Or somewhere in the middle. I mean,
All right. If yours is hard, mine is just hard enough to stay entertaining.
If it is,
That's just. I'm trying to answer the question in a way that's, I don't know, less specific.
I don't think it's a complicated question.
No, but it's an open-ended question without an answer, I feel like.
But yeah,
And I'm trying to answer it in a simple and straightforward way.
if it was
Which
that
is,
easy, this would just be like a 10-minute discussion, then we leave.
anyways, I think that's what, like 45 minutes for talking in circles?
55.
That's between both questions, though.
Yeah.
It's about 20 for one and 30 for the other.
Yeah. So what's your
Okay.
topic?
My topic is, well, I've been playing Ghost of Tsushima recently, which is not an RPG, just for obviousness. And I read a article or saw an article and watched a couple videos and about people complaining about how it's an American company made a big Japanese game, super culturally Japanese, and everyone's giving Sucker Punch hate for taking
My
Jap.
cultural appropriation.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And my thought is, where's the difference between an appropriation and appreciation? And in an RPG setting, could an American RPG use Japan as a setting and be okay? Could they change all the Japanese culture to American culture in the localization process? Or could a Japanese JRPG use a culture other than Japan and still be what it is?
That's a pretty complicated question
I know it
because
is.
it goes way beyond video games
Mm,
into more of a political question.
I'm aware. That's why I've been trying to figure out how to properly word it for like a week.
There's no way to. I mean, it's like the whole censorship thing. Sooner or later, it just comes down to a political basis.
Hmm.
So, I mean, I
So,
don't give a shit about answering the way I feel. Just
all right. Well, simple and straightforward then. Super Japanese JRPG set in Tokyo. Main character's name is Hiro and Yusuke and whatever the hell. If that got Americanized, how much of a change on the game do you think it would be if they Americanized the cities and the characters, added American slang, made it the same mechanics, the same story, but in an American setting?
well, that's different. That's
Do,
a
do you
different
think that
question completely.
it was one of my like four that I had all mixed together?
I was going to say, is your question, can a foreign studio make a game about a foreign country?
That was one of
Or,
my questions.
yeah, like you had like four questions in there, and we'll be here like all day. Like, I don't, I
Yeah.
like that. There's way too much to unpack here.
All right. So
So,
we'll just start with.
pick something. Sorry. It's just seriously, we could be here for a long ass time because you're covering a lot of shit.
I know that's kind of why I was hoping your questions would be quicker. But all right, we'll just stick with the one for now then.
Which was,
If it got when a game got localized, if they changed characters and cities and names and all that stuff to fit wherever it got localized to,
okay, that I don't like.
would that work or not work, or why?
I think that is an insult to the art. Um, you used to see this a lot. Fun fact: Persona One, this even happened in,
I'm aware.
and I think it's an insult to the integrity of the art that you don't believe that it can stand on its own merits in another country, or it's an insult to the culture of the country that you think that another country would not be receptive to it.
Honestly, though, do you think that they would get the same wide appeal if they didn't?
Well, you're approaching it from the point of view of a publisher and from sales, and I personally care more about the integrity of the art because I think that something with a unique voice that has a unique vision, even if it does not gain the immediate success that most publishers and marketers are looking for, will last in the public conscience much longer than something that might necessarily sell well out the gate but won't have that long lasting legacy.
Okay. I'm just personally I agree, but I'm kind of trying to play devil's advocate to make somewhat of a point. I'm wondering if
Well,
still the if the narrative of the story and the concept of the story and the points that they're trying to make through the story would be approachable by more people by simply changing even simple stuff like names
well,
to something that's more easily recognizable by the public.
without getting too much into the censorship question, I think the strongest ground you would have on the other side of this question,
Hmm.
since we are both on the same side in terms of the devil's advocate,
Yeah,
would be your more culturally sensitive things, like a lot of the Japanese games, it's like ages getting changed
hmm,
or outfits getting changed due to a character's age,
yeah,
and I don't agree with it. I The problem is it's impossible, I think, to say definitively one way or another because both sides are going to say you lost sales because you censored it, and the other
yeah.
side's going to say I never would have bought this because it has a 16-year-old in a bikini.
Yeah,
So until you have somehow that product
that just
where,
out of the gates is acceptable by everyone.
well, where like you have a choice to play
Okay,
it one way,
so
like the problem is in order
like
for
could you
there,
pick like next to the difficulty, pick like original mode or fixed for America mode?
yeah, or
And you
sell
can pick,
two separate copies of the game because you want to keep, you're doing it for statistics because you know enough about science to know that in an experiment you only want to have one variable.
mm,
The fewer variables you have, the more accurate result. So when you're talking about sales, you're usually talking about radically different games of radically different popularities and radically different series that have had radically different sales numbers.
yeah,
That there's too many variables to be able to say either way
to
whether or
adequately
not,
compare the two.
yeah, to really say whether or not censorship or changes like that really impact sales one way or the other.
Okay.
But I think that is the strongest argument against it. I don't agree with it,
Hmm.
but kind of a similar take on this
Okay.
is the debate between translation and localization,
Yeah,
where translations tend to be more faithful to the original material and
but you can
localization,
lose the meaning
yeah,
in certain
in like idiomatic
in,
expressions
in
and
certain yeah.
jokes and references and puns and things like that.
Okay.
Whereas localizations tend to take the script and adjust it and tweak it more to fit what that country might expect.
So where's the line between enough of a change to be acceptable and too far gone from the original?
and I
Or
hate to
is.
say this, it's because having worked in other languages and particularly Japanese, there
Mhm.
is no hard line to
Yeah.
the point where it can be a situation by situation basis. I
Mhm.
will say I don't particularly care for seeing like you jelly in Persona 5.
Yeah.
I think when it loses it for me, two big things.
Okay.
Uh, First of all, when you tend to lose tone, I'm not a huge fan of it. So like I
Mhm.
know, oh god, I'm gonna have to Google this. Ted Woolsey, I just remembered it,
Okay.
was a huge translator in the Super Nintendo days at Square Enix.
Okay.
And a lot of people love his translations because he made characters a lot more quirky and eccentric and had a lot more comedy in the game.
Okay.
And so when there's been retranslations of like Final Fantasy VI or Chrono Trigger, a lot of the old guard gets really upset because they're like, it's not as charming, it's a lot more stiff. They
But it's
like,
a lot more closer to the original material.
yeah, they liked the bouncing clown that said son, that swore was son of a submariner.
Okay.
I prefer a more literal translation.
Yeah. Okay.
Um, the second area where you lose me, well, I prefer a little more literal translation because I think again it comes back to the art and what the art was trying to do and trying to preserve the vision of the artist.
Okay.
You're never going to be able to have a translation that doesn't in some way incorporate the translator's own interpretation of the work.
Yeah.
But
But the idea is to get as close to the original writing as possible.
right,
Okay.
where possible, it's never 100% doable, but to try to preserve the spirit of what they were trying to say. And sometimes you get that tonal shift that I'm not a huge fan of.
Yeah.
And the second place is trying to incorporate contemporary culture into the script,
Mhm.
and that's where I don't like you jelly
Yeah.
because people might have said you jelly 10 years ago.
Mhm.
Nobody says that these days.
Yeah.
It's like if you called someone salty,
Mhm.
like in the game.
Yeah.
Nobody like that. That is only a relevant phrase for a very specific period of time.
Yes.
5 years from now, I suspect nobody will be saying you salty unless you're an old fag.
But is that maybe okay because that's when the game takes place? And the game takes place in a period where they would say something like that?
Not when you're using internet slang that changes within months.
Yeah. So maybe it has to be like more long-term references.
Well, just don't include it.
Don't include what?
That slang.
Internet slang in general?
Yeah, just don't. It's too transient.
Okay. So then what would you say? Just use regular speech in general?
Yeah, because the only way that it would work is if like there was originally a meme there,
If it was a joke in the original translation, in the original language?
because like uh, to use Steins Gate, which is a visual novel, but it's the only example I can think of that does this off the
Okay.
top of my head.
Okay.
Kirisu, I think that was her name,
Okay.
will occasionally drop references to 2chan memes.
Okay.
And if you're an external viewer, that fucking flies so far over your fucking head. I don't
I can,
fucking get half of them.
okay.
And if you're localizing it, I understand you're presented with this complex situation in which nobody's going to understand the meme because nobody in the fucking West, like, unless you're, like, I'm going to guess most people in the West don't know what 2chan is.
Yeah, that's fair.
But do you, when it comes to, like, replacing a meme, it's really hard to find one.
What do you replace that with that still kind of feels the same, but people will understand?
Yeah, like, because 2chan is not the same as Twitter or Reddit. Like, you can't just post a Doge meme or Doge or whatever the fuck it was,
Mm,
and like expect it to work and be relevant and still capture the same thing.
okay.
It's just memes don't translate, man.
No,
So just don't.
so just stick with the original, and
Just
if they don't
fucking
get it,
just fucking do it literally. And if they don't get it,
then
it
that sucks.
it's okay. It's like a small part of their character, and believe it or not, this is where your critical reading skills come in, and you can judge by the character's reactions. Oh, okay. I don't have to necessarily know what this meme is to understand it's not
That
something
it's
she would normally say.
okay.
Got it. But it's a fine line. And I appreciate a lot of the difficulty that goes into it.
That goes into translating and localizing these things.
Mm-hmm.
All right,
But for my money, I prefer slightly stiffer but closer to the original than I do to something completely
completely
fluent
different.
but might not necessarily capture the original as well.
All right, no, generally I'm gonna agree with that. For me, at least with like the modern ones, seeing the different culture and the references and all that is part of one of the things I enjoy. So when they change it too much, I feel like I lose some of the enjoyment of exploring something completely different. So yeah, I kind of agree with you that I'm more of a fan of the closer to the original, even if there's the occasional thing that I won't get or I'll have to Google. But yeah, I kind of figured we'd agree on that one.
Okay.
I
Was
don't.
there
I'm happy with
another facet of your question that you wanted to bring up, or do you want to just call it for now?
it. We can save the next one for next week.
Okay, because I do feel, I don't know, just to get into it because I don't think it'd take very long, and I'm sure we would both agree.
Yeah.
I don't give a shit who makes what game as long as the game is good. But I do think that it really comes down to vision.
Yeah.
Um, I don't think an American person or American studio can make a Japanese game that's about Japan the same way that a Japanese studio can make a game that's about Japan. But that doesn't mean that they shouldn't be allowed to. And it doesn't necessarily mean that the game's going to be bad. It's just going to be different. Everyone's got their own voice and their own interpretation.
Their own idea of what it is.
Because even when Japan makes something that's more traditionally Western, you get something like Dragon's Dogma or Dark Souls, both of which still stand out from other Western games, even though they're much more in that vein or style.
Okay.
It's like I don't think anybody should be banned from, like, in books writing a gay main character, but somebody who's actually gay will probably have a lot more to bring to the table.
Mm.
That doesn't mean that it's automatically better or that it's automatically going to invalidate something. You know, that the straight guy who wrote a gay protagonist is suddenly bad. Art is
I
about,
agree, but what if it's wrong? Like the point is to be this somewhat accurate or realistic portrayal of this culture, and it's just completely dead wrong. Do we just say, oh, they didn't know, so that's okay and ignore it? Or at what point do you say this is bad because it's wrong and they did something that they don't know anything about?
It's just gonna depend, man. Like
Because, I mean,
that's a circumstance to circumstance thing. Like
it's like the
the
two examples I'm thinking of are Ghost of Tsushima, which is this historical event that is, I don't know much about, but supposedly really well realized, and even the Japanese reviewers are saying it's fucking great. And Ni no Kuni 2, where the president is, or the one of the main characters is the president of the United States. And in the first problem, he just whips a gun out of his coat and shoots a guy in the face. And it's fucking awesome. It's a great moment in the game just because it's fucking funny as shit. But that is not the president of the United States. He doesn't just whip out a gun and shoot a guy in the face.
I it and
And,
it,
and is that okay just because
it there's
that was
certain
their vision?
there's a
Or
lot more
is it
to it because first of all, like I think Nino Cooney gets more of a pass
because
because
it's cartoony as fuck?
it's mostly cartoony and not trying to seriously recreate a
Hmm.
major historical event.
No, and I get that.
The
But what?
tone is also much more lighthearted.
Hmm.
Tone also, I think, plays a big role in it. But to me, it's stuff like the only thing I know about that game that I've seen people complaining about this is like, oh, it has haiku in it, even though haiku wasn't invented yet.
Hmm.
And it's like,
I
whatever,
mean,
dude.
there are other issues in Tsushima that aren't historically accurate, and they've said that they kind of tried to mix historically accurate and a person's interpretation of what a samurai would be. And they've acknowledged that these things aren't accurate because they wanted to go for appeal.
And that's the thing. They're not writing a fucking history book.
Hmm.
They're not making a recreation of the event. Who the fuck
Hmm.
cares? And it's like the Battlefield thing,
Yeah,
where they had women in World War II now.
yeah.
And it's like, if that's not your bag, don't fucking buy the game. There are how
Yep.
many other fucking World War II shooters out there? Holy
Yeah.
shit, dude. Like,
Hmm.
you don't have to play this one if what you're looking for,
Isn't what this one is.
yeah,
Yeah.
like, people have a right to make what they want to make. And if they
Hmm.
want to give players that kind of customization, whatever, dude. And I understand that's a blanket argument that could easily be turned against us.
It
Fine.
could.
But, like, nothing's going to be ever 100% historically accurate because history itself is not 100% accurate.
Yeah.
It's, and this is my I love history thing, but it's the story we tell ourselves about ourselves.
Yeah.
It is by its nature flawed because it is narrative. It is what we
It's all.
tell ourselves.
Yeah.
But it's just the story of us instead of some other piece of, fiction.
Hmm.
Which means there's as much about it that's wrong or misinterpreted or,
Or just inaccurate as there is. Yeah.
because believe it or not, there's a shitload of different ways of doing things and being
Hmm.
to where, even the concept of like the American identity and experience is such a contested one. If
Okay.
you really start digging into it, there's no real objectivity there.
Yeah.
And that's where you can make something like Bioshock
Yeah.
and be like, is anybody shitting on Bioshock because it didn't capture the 50s correctly?
No, but was it trying to?
And that's my point.
Yeah.
It,
Your
it
point is it's
it's trying
perfectly fine to be wrong as long as you're not trying to be right.
as long as you're not trying to make that claim that you're right.
Okay.
As long as you're not saying this is objectively how it is, then
Then you can kind of play
whatever.
around with it.
It's why they say this is based on a true story in movies, because we all know that half the shit is fake anyway. Because
Hmm.
real life very rarely makes for a good movie.
Yeah. Okay.
Doesn't make those movies crap.
It just makes them not fully realistic.
Yeah, and if
And as
anything,
long as you acknowledge that, it's kind of okay.
yeah, and if anything, it can inspire people to get more interested in the thing. Like I learned a lot more about Henry VIII and that time period because I watched The Tudors, a
Okay.
long time ago, like a decade ago,
Yeah.
and like that's pure fucking fantasy, aside from some character names and events.
No, okay.
But what the fuck ever, dude. It
Okay.
got me interested. I learned a lot about real history from it,
Yeah.
and it never claimed to be what really happened.
So it's more than the content, it's the claim.
Yeah,
Okay. I can accept that you can kind of make whatever you want to your vision, and that's more or less okay as long as you admit or publicize that that's your vision and not the proper accurate portrayal.
yeah. I think a better word would probably be intent.
Okay.
I doubt the intent of Ghost of Tsushima was to educate or recreate a perfectly accurate Japan.
Yeah.
Therefore, who gives a shit?
Okay.
I mean, if you're like somebody who's really would have preferred it that way, that's your preference, dude, and
I mean
that's
that's
something completely different.
okay.
We're back to Battlefield 2 having, or Battlefield 5 having women in World War II.
Hmm.
They're not making a historical World War II simulator.
They're just making a shooter kind of set in that period.
Yeah, and if you would prefer it to not have women in it for
There are
historical accuracy,
plenty of other more options that will
that's
fit
your
that.
preference, dude.
Okay.
Just recognize that there's a difference.
Okay.
They're not like shitting on the memory of whoever fought in World War II or whatever, because holy shit, that was never the point.
Okay. All
So,
right. So it's just more the intent behind it.
yeah,
Okay.
intent coupled with execution.
I can kind of get behind that. All right.
All right, and that sums up this episode. I don't have a fucking ending. I never
Well,
have
we
an
never
ending.
do. We never do.